Humanities. I want to first thank everybody for being here today for another Business of the Arts workshop. Today we will be going over the framework for accessibility and inclusion. What you see right now as you enter the room and into the space is a welcome. And so, again, before we get started, we ask that you take a moment to share your responses to the following prompt. When thinking about accessibility and inclusion in relation to disability within my organization programming, write any thoughts, words, or phrases on a sticky note and add them to the board. If you look over into the chat, you will find a link that you can access and go ahead and participate before we get started. And with all of that being said, before I punt the ball over to David, I just wanted to let everybody know, again, thank you. And then we'll be having some upcoming sessions that'll be on February the 17th at 11 to 12:30, and that will be on trademarking basics for individual artists. And then on February the 25th, we will be going over developing your grant application, the elements and components of grant making, and that'll be from 1:30 p.m. to 2:30 p.m. And then if everybody could, when you get the opportunity later on in the week, later on in the day, if you could go ahead over to dcarts.gov to go ahead and check out our new DC Arts Beats series podcast. And so with that being said, if you can take the floor, David, if you hear me.
Thanks so much, Devon. Welcome, everybody. We're going to give everybody a couple of minutes to respond to the Jamboard that Devon mentioned. For those of you who have not used Jamboards in the past, if you look over to the left-hand side, you have some options. There's some sticky notes. You can pull images from Google and add them. You can circle different things or add text boxes. So I just added a Post-it that you'll see, or a sticky note up in the upper left-hand corner. So you can you can edit it using the three little buttons. You can duplicate it. You can change the location, change the size. You can also change the rotation if you'd like to turn things on its head. Please give some time to think of some of the challenges, some of the things that you're looking forward to, and that'll give us a sense of the temperature of the room. So we'll take about 5 minutes to do that, and then we'll jump in.
So David, I think if we can take about 2 more minutes on this activity, that would be great.
Great, super, thanks, Diane.
No problem.
So we're going to get started. Please continue to populate this document. You have access to it, even though it will not be on the screen. And then we'll circle back to it in a couple of minutes to discuss everything that's on it. Again, welcome everybody. I mentioned before, my name is David Markey. I'm the Deputy Director at the Arts Commission. I'd like to welcome you and give a very warm welcome to a colleague and a very dear friend, Diane Nutting, who's our presenter today. She has engaged with the Commission for the past 5 or 6 years in offering various types of workshops, and has offered this probably for the last 4 or 5 years. We'll also schedule a workshop later in the spring targeting teaching artists and the work that is done directly in the classroom with young people. It's going to be a jam-packed 2 hours. Those of you who may have participated in the workshop in the past, it's usually a 3-hour workshop, but this is our first time delivering it on a virtual platform, at the Commission at least. So we thank you for your patience if we have some glitches along the way. It is a journey, this whole virtual delivery. And with that said, something I ask everybody to bear in mind is that when we speak of access and inclusion, and as it relates to providing services and welcoming people to our organizations and our programming who have disabilities, just to remind ourselves that it is a journey. And that's another challenge of working from home, is that we have Amazon deliveries every 2 minutes. So apologies for that. But it is a journey. And as I read recently, what is important about journeys is that you place your foot on the pathway and begin the journey. Doesn't matter where you are, but what's important is that you begin the journey. So going to hand it over to my colleague, Patrick, for some housekeeping.
Thanks so much, David. Hi, everyone. This is Patrick Realisa with the DC Commission on the Arts and Humanities. You're probably seeing my screen right now, so I'm just going to take this time to go over some logistics. So the first thing is we want to make sure that you guys are all aware the session is being recorded, and we will make it available following the conclusion of the program. So for those of you who missed it or want to share with your friends, we'll have it on our website and on our social media. The second thing is, I don't know how many of you are familiar with the view settings, but there's a number of different things that you can do to kind of adjust the settings to your fitting. So if you go to the top, and depending on what view you have right now, you should be able to see like a layout button there. And if you have any issues, please just directly reach out to me via the chat, and I'll do my best to help as we go through this program. The other thing is, please keep your microphones muted. We want to make sure that the presenters and the people who are slated to speak throughout the portions of the program are able to speak and everyone can hear them. And then also for those who are interested in viewing the closed captioning, we do have a stream text link, which will be listed in the chat if it's not already been provided. And for those of you who wish to utilize that, we recommend that you open this in a separate browser or on a separate device if possible. We want to encourage you to share your questions using the chat box at the bottom. And if the chat box isn't accessible for you, please feel free to use the raise your hand feature. And so basically, if you go on the participant side, depending on what view you have, you should be able to see an option to, there's like a little hand feature that you can use that. And my colleagues will also be monitoring that if we don't get to you. But we'll use that to acknowledge you and unmute your mic as needed. So I hope I've covered everything. The last thing is, if just as a friendly reminder, I will be serving as the technical host. So all of your questions that you send to the that's not in the general will go to me. And again, we appreciate you making time out of your day and bearing with us through all these technical difficulties. So on that note, I will stop my screen sharing and turn it over to Diane for the formal program. Thanks so much.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's such a pleasure to be here. I'm really excited to see you all. I invite you for a moment to actually turn on your camera. I would just love to see who we have in the room, only if you're comfortable doing so, however. So much of this work is about community. And so just seeing who our learning community is this afternoon would be great. I'm actually seeing a couple familiar names that I've intersected with in the past, so it's great to see you all here. Really delighted to be with you all. As David will tell you, one of my favorite things to do is to give workshops and to give sessions, mainly because it gives us this chance for conversation and discussion. One of my least favorite things to do is to do this digitally, because we're missing a lot of the interactivity that happens when we do this work. We're gonna work through this as best we can today. And I do want to do a formal introduction of myself. My name is Diane Nutting. I'm an accessibility inclusion consultant located here in the DMV. My pronouns are she, hers. And just to give you a verbal description, I am a white middle-aged woman with shoulder length, brownish, blondish, ashish, right now, colored hair, pulled back away from my face. I'm wearing glasses, and I'm wearing a purple blouse with a bow tie at the neck. And I am sitting in my living room / dining room / office at the moment. So like I said, really this is about connection. I am going to be sharing a screen today, but I am going to be stopping that throughout the workshop so that we can have a chance to really have a conversation and to really see each other. So again, I welcome you to turn on your camera at those moments, but please don't feel pressured to do so. And before we get started, I do want to just talk really quickly about the concept of safe space. It's really important when we're doing this work that folks feel like this is a space where they can be honest. This is a journey, as David pointed out, and so a lot of what we talk about is just kind of where we are on that journey and what that means. So I will say that, what happens here, just like Vegas, what happens here in WebEx stays in WebEx today. I'm, just, and the flip side of that is that we assume positive intent, right? So if someone has a question or they type something in the chat, that, we're just assuming that it's coming from a place of positivity and wanting to do the best that you can in this work. You've obviously all given up 2 hours of the day to be here. So, we trust that we're doing that. And we're also, I don't want you to censor yourself if you have a question. I will be talking a little bit about language a little further into the presentation, but I don't want you to feel like I can't ask this question because I'm not sure if it's the right question. I'm not sure if I'm phrasing it right. Just get the question out and we'll navigate it together. And really just acknowledging that we're all on a journey and we all have our entry points. So can I just get some thumbs up or some reaction claps that we're all okay with those safe space rules and we're all great. Oh, look at people with their little clapping thumbers things, happy faces. That's so exciting. Okay, so you can't do that in a real life situation. And like we did say, we do have a fabulous captioner with us today. We've dropped that link into the chat. I'll have Crystal drop it again. So that link is there. You want to open it in a separate browser window if you do want to follow along in the chat, or you can actually open it on a separate device. If you have like an iPad that you want to have. What's neat about StreamText is you can actually adjust the font size and things. We normally would have the captioning in this platform, but we're having a little bit of difficulty with that today. So we're going to just do this other option instead. Okay, so with that, let's talk about the Jamboard for a moment. So if I can ask David to reshare the Jamboard. I know Crystal and Devon have been organizing some of the post-its that we have up there. And Crystal, for the sake of my eyes, can I ask you to chime in and tell us a little bit about what we're, or Devon, sort of what we're seeing and what some of the themes were that were coming out?
I'm actually going to turn it over to Jean, if that's okay, as she was monitoring the Jamboard.
Perfect.
All right, I'm going to, we're going to take a look at, thank you all for your stickies, as we're going to call them. And I even love that someone took a chance with the pen and wrote "Fun for All." Diane, do you just want me to read some of these for you? They're very small.
Just if there are some themes coming up, that would be really helpful. Like what are the themes we're hearing about, you know, as people express just their thoughts around accessibility and inclusion for people with disabilities in their organization?
Well, as a grants making organization, I see a theme of what resources are available to us to be able to provide this. That's always finding accessible venues can be a challenge, and that's, you know, are there grants to cover that? And then the ASL and the captioning services. Interesting one, how to avoid hierarchy of disabilities. Some matter more than others. Creating community connections, how to reach the people who require these services, and how to reach people, and how to get these practices going with a small, overworked staff. There's a lot of a lot of nonprofits work on a small staff. So
yeah, these are all great things. Yeah, anything that anyone is really excited about or looking forward to?
There's one that's the opportunity to share art with others.
Nice. And we have Fun for All. So there's a lot of feelings that come up when we're doing this work. And some of the things are like, wow, I'm really excited about that. And sometimes we're like, wow, I'm really puzzled by that. And I'm not sure how that's going to work. I do a lot of that in some of the other projects I work on. I work a lot with the Smithsonian Folklife Festival, and we have had to shift to a completely digital model. And there has been a lot of conversation around how do we do that? So there's a lot of, we're not frightened by that or worried about it, but it is a puzzle and a challenge we have to figure out. And then there's stuff that we're just worried about. We're worried about saying the wrong thing. We're worried about doing the wrong thing. We're worried about how we continue to keep this a priority at a time, and we'll talk about this in a little bit, when there are so many priorities and we're having to reshift how we think about a lot of things, right? And I will just say, in full disclosure, you know, I've done this workshop many times, but now we're doing it in a time of, it's a very different landscape for all of us right now. And there's some things that we need to think about as we move forward there. So thank you, Jean, and thank you, Devon and Crystal and everyone who helped with the board of JAM. This was my first time using Jamboard, so it's an exciting tool. I see we have some new people who've joined us, so very exciting. Good to see you. We're going to go ahead. I'm going to actually go ahead and share my screen, which is going to be sort of our official PowerPoint for today. And I thank you in advance for your patience. I am not a WebEx aficionado. I actually work on some different platforms, but I'm going to struggle through, but it might be a little clunky, but sort of all for the good. So here we go. We have, let's adjust this here. Oh, I can't adjust that. Okay, great. Okay, so just a little bit about our session today. As David said, we have a lot to get through. But we have the goals really is to really sort of work through this and to give you all some vocabulary and a framework for you to continue thinking about the work. This is not going to be a magic bullet session. You're not going to leave here just being like, okay, I know how to include everybody. That's not going to happen. This work is a journey. It's very possible you might leave this session today with more questions than answers. And that, in my opinion, is actually okay. Because it's the beginning, you know, it's the first step on the journey or a continued step on the journey. We're going to, speaking of your organizational journey, we're going to offer some tools for assessment of that journey and how you vision forward. We're going to give you some resources and strategies today. My good friend Crystal is going to be dropping some resources into the chat as we continue and do our conversation today. We'll also be sending those resources to you after the presentation, so don't worry, but they will be also in the chat for you. And really, my hope is that you leave here feeling empowered, that you feel like, okay, this is something we can do, and this is something we can start sort of exploring. So to begin framing the conversation, what I want to sort of talk about is the idea of disability justice in conjunction with a lot of the conversations we've been having, and sort of approaching the work of accessibility and inclusion through that lens. The Ford Foundation has been doing some amazing work. They have a whole campaign called There Is No Justice Without Disability. Crystal's dropping the link to that right now. And there's a video that I want to share with you that is Rebecca Coakley. Rebecca was actually the director of the Disability Justice Initiative at the Center for American Progress. And then about a month ago, she moved over to the Ford Foundation, and she has actually, she's now running the Disability Justice Initiative over at the Ford Foundation. And she has a long backstory. She's really a powerhouse. If you don't know her, I encourage you to look her up. But I'm going to share this video that she has shared and talked about that's part of this campaign. So I'm going to stop my sharing. So this is the clunky part that I talked about. But I'm going to share this video really quickly. And oops, wait, nope, did it wrong. Did it wrong. Okay. Thank you for your patience. Okay. Oh, here we go. All right, so this is about 3 minutes long.
One in 5 people in this country is a person with a disability. It's interesting to walk down the street and count off every 5 people that you see. That's one of my people. That's one of my people. There's another one of my people. And to realize how broad the definition of disability is. There is not a civil rights issue today. There's not a community. There's not a demographic. There is not an issue impacting marginalized communities that does not have a disproportionate impact on the 57 million people with disabilities in this country. My name is Rebecca Coakley. I welcome you to join us to be truly inclusive and center the voices of marginalized people with disabilities. Here would be a couple of my suggestions about how to live your values. Hiring people with disabilities in roles that are not just disability specific. People are policy. It really matters who's at the table. And when you have a diversity of thought at the table, when you have a group of people that represent as wide a definition of the American experience as you can, it changes things. Ensuring that as you're doing events and activities that you're including statements around accessibility and who to contact for reasonable accommodations at your events. Making sure that you plan events at accessible locations. One of the things I continue to hear is that people are like, well, disabled people never come to our events. Well, if there's 4 steps and no elevator, we're not going to come. Or if you don't have a sign language interpreter, we're not going to come. Including us in your imaging. You know, on your website, there's a lot of potential around communication strategies and branding that could have a significant role in increasing the inclusion of people with disabilities across the board. And it really is about moving beyond just the traditional images of people with physical disabilities. The real key is talking to folks and asking, what accommodations does your community use? How do we reflect that? This is not a call out, this is a call in. It definitely is about saying specifically, as we're doing social justice work, how is disability included?
Okay. So as I sort of set up my screen share here for a moment and sort of close out of that, I'm going to invite some folks to share just your initial thoughts about that as you we've got a tooting horn there from somebody, but just share your thoughts, either verbally or in the chat. Just what are some things that stood out from that video for you?
Sometimes I'm surprised by how small steps or small efforts on our end can make a big difference for people, like the note about providing notes like on your website when you're marketing an event for who to talk to regarding accessibility at your organization or at the venue. I was like, oh, that's something we could do so easily that I never thought about, right? Like that was really cool.
Right, yeah. Anything else that anyone, you can either type it in the chat or just turn on your mic or camera and just chime in.
Hi, this is Jared Fisher with Dance Institute. I have a question. So I noticed on press conferences ever since COVID-19, we've been seeing a lot of sign language provision, and that seems to be becoming an industry best practice. So I was wondering, do you feel like arts organizations should start including some sign language to go hand in hand with their arts presentations?
Sure, that's a great question. You know, I think sign language is American Sign Language interpretation is one thing you can think about providing. It's really just thinking about, I mean, yes, of course, if you can provide that, that would be awesome. You know, I think that's definitely, and of course, it's interesting in a digital platform because there's some things that come up with that in terms of just accessing that. So we'll get to that, and Jared, I'm gonna say yes, we should do that, but I'm gonna actually put a pin in that question because I think we'll circle to it in a moment, a couple moments actually when we get to talking about just services we can provide to and considerations we can make to make our programs more accessible. So. Okay, I'm going to go ahead. What I like about this video is that, you know, I feel that Rebecca, first off, I would follow Rebecca into fire. She is just, she's an amazing human, and I've heard her speak live, and I've talked to her, and I worked with her on a project this summer. She just is, she's an incredible advocate, and she's incredibly articulate. And she speaks across the spectrum of disability, which she talks about, you know, that it is a fluid continuum, and there's that the definition of disability is very wide. And she speaks not only from her own lived experience as an individual with disabilities, but she speaks across the board to represent other individuals with disabilities, which is one of the reasons I wanted to include this. And the idea that she says, you know, this is a call-in. This is not about like, this is what you're doing wrong. This is about how can we do things differently. How can we think about this in different ways? She talks about marketing. She talks about messaging. She talks about creating accessible and inclusive space. These are all things we're going to touch on in our session today. So just as we move forward, I want to talk a little bit about disability, just so that we're all on the same page. So when we talk about disability for the purposes of this session, but also in general, we are talking about the entire spectrum of disabilities. So we are talking about physical, learning disabilities, developmental disabilities, sensory, emotional, behavioral, cognitive, all of that. You know, I think we just celebrated the 30th anniversary of the ADA. And I think that when the ADA was passed, people were like, great, so we'll put in a ramp and we'll put everything in Braille and we'll hire a sign language interpreter and we're done. And I think how we think about disability has shifted. I think there is a greater acceptance of and a greater willingness to disclose a disability, particularly if it is an invisible disability. So, you know, you see there that the CDC, if Rebecca says 1 in 5 in her video, I am not one to ever disagree with Rebecca Coakley. However, I will say that the latest statistics from the Centers for Disease Control is that 1 in 4 persons in the US has a disability. So that is 25% of your audience, 25% of your visitor base, 25% of your stakeholders. And probably over 75 to 80% of these disabilities are not visible to you. So they are going to be disabilities that, you know, are not going to present themselves straight out. Also, you know, taking into consideration major health conditions that impact major life activities. Diabetes, multiple sclerosis, Ehlers-Danlos, HIV, mental health conditions, those are all things that you think about when you think about disability as it relates to inclusivity and accessibility in your cultural arts organization. And disability is also the only group with open enrollment. You can join at any time. That can be a temporary membership, or that can be something that is more long-term. We are certainly experiencing a very interesting time where COVID is creating a different framing of disability. We are definitely seeing long-term physical and developmental impacts, physical and mental health impacts from COVID. And so that is shifting it as well. So that's just something to think about as we think about disability. I'm going to talk really briefly about the historical models of disability. This is going to be super fast. And the reason I'm talking about this is actually just to kind of give us a frame of the way in which disability has been thought of in the past. Just before we move forward, Crystal, do we have any questions in the chat that I need to be aware of?
We do not.
Okay, great, thank you. So great, so historically, there are many different frames and models of disability that have been used as frames in the past. I'm going to talk about just 3 of the major ones that you tend to see. And I'm going to put them up on the board here. The first one is the idea of the moral model, which you have often seen in religious texts. Captain Hook is a good example of this. Any Lifetime movie of the week where the bad guy, you know, has a patch and a hook and he's coming to get you. This idea that disability somehow was an indication of something wrong with the person internally, right? So then the second model that we tend to see, that we've tended to see historically with disability, is the idea of the charity pity model. The idea that individuals with disabilities are simply less fortunate than individuals without disabilities. And so it's this model of needing help, of pity. The Jerry Lewis MDA telethon was based on this model for many, many years. The reason, you know, that money was raised by bringing out individuals with significant visible disabilities, having really heart-to-heart conversations with them about how horrible their life was. And then basically the sort of the kind of the subtext was, don't you feel lucky that your child doesn't have this, so you should give money to this cause? And I don't want to in any way downplay the money that was raised for multiple, you know, for muscular dystrophy research, but the way in which it sort of went about rubs a lot of people in the disability community the wrong way. And inspiration porn is a phrase that's used a lot in the disability community now. This these feel good stories that are created around disability, that are really designed to make people without disabilities feel really good and feel really warm and fuzzy. And generally, they are stemming from a place of a person with a disability could never ever do this. So this is like a historic thing that it's happening, right? So that's one model that we tend to see or have seen in the past. There's definitely a lot of the charity pity model. The flip side of that is the heroism model. And then the medical model, which is this idea that individuals with disabilities are sort of a collection of their diagnosis, if you will, and they are to be fixed. And once they are fixed, they will be whole and normal, but they are not until that happens. And so it's a medical approach. I'm not knocking medical intervention because it's definitely a wonderful thing, and a lot of people with disabilities do intersect with the medical community. It's just, if that is the only way that you are framing disability, that is when it becomes a little bit of an issue, and it can impact. So what we see in examples of these three models is that disability is located in the individual, right? And what's really interesting is that there's an immediate shift of power that happens, that individuals without disabilities are sort of on a higher plane than individuals with disabilities in all three of these models. Now, in comparison, the social model of disability, and there's several, as I said, models of disability that create more empowerment, more equity and justice. But the social model is the one I want to sort of touch on because I think it's the one that relates most to the work that we do in our cultural arts institutions. And the major concepts here are the idea of impairment, so that, an individual might have an impairment in that, they are of a different stature than is considered, traditional for someone of their age. They might have a limb difference. They might not hear or might not see. They might not use senses in the same way. What's really interesting is that in the social model of disability, they're like, okay, that's just who you are. That's an organic part of your life. That's a natural part of the continuum of living your life of disability. But it doesn't of impairment, but it doesn't become a disability until you're excluded as a result of the impairment. So in other words, someone who doesn't think about the fact that they have a mobility impairment, goes about their daily life, is actively involved in their community, is a mother, is a teacher, is a student, and doesn't really think about disability until all of a sudden they encounter the cement staircase at their grad school with no railings on either side. The person hasn't shifted. What's shifted is the environment. The environment is constructed in a way that assumes that no one would need to get to the top of that staircase in a different way, that no one would require a railing to get up to the top. It's designed with the idea that there's only one way to move and navigate in space. And in the social model of disability, the idea of normalcy is that we all have our own level of normal. So the idea here in social model is that impairment plus environment is what creates disability. And environment can be your physical space, but it also can be the attitudinal space, the communication space, the programmatic space. But that environment is what is creating a disability in that moment. So this is a more equitable power dynamic than the other three models, although one of my good friends who is also a disability advocate and is a member of the disability community said to me the other day, yeah, but there's still a little bit of a power shift because there's someone who's creating the accessibility and someone who's receiving the accessible environment. But it is more equitable than the other models. And it is one of access centering and inclusive design. So you're like, this is great, Diane, why do I care? And why you should care is that the framing model of disability can really impact several different things. It can impact the way we understand our environments, the language we use, how we design our programs and our engagement, our approaches to education, and our expectations. And in an educational setting, that can be the expectations of what a student can or can't do. In a cultural arts environment, it's the expectation of you've already decided who would be interested in your art. You've already decided who's going to engage in your programs. You know, a person with XYZ disability isn't going to be interested, so we're not going to bother making things accessible. And usually those decisions are being made by people without disabilities who are making assumptions about people with disabilities. So it's important to also recognize that your model, so you might be like, great, we're the Hippy Dippy Theater Company and we're all about, the social model of disability. And also recognizing though that that might not be the same model of disability that your stakeholders have, that the schools that you go into work with have, that the different partners that you work with. So in those moments, thinking about, okay, how can we be a catalyst for a change? How can we be working in a way that is exploring our own model of disability, but also framing that in a way that is sort of spreading the word and spreading the information to other organizations as well. Excuse me. So as I said, the models can impact language. Language is an organic outcome of perception. If you think about words that maybe you've heard people use to describe disabilities or individuals with disabilities, you may be able to link those words back to sort of the charity pity model or the medical model or even the moral model. Thinking about words that you've heard people of generations that are younger than you and generations that are older than you, there's definitely some generational shift in how language is used. So I'm going to sort of talk, and what I'm using in this presentation is what's called person-first language, which is something you might have heard of before. There are a lot of different kinds of language. There are a lot of languages of an extremely personal choice. I recommend a default to person-first language for anyone in a customer service setting, which I believe that most of you, identify in that way in the work that you do and how you reach out to your community. So person first is just what it sounds like. You're literally, saying, we have a guest, we have a guest who uses a wheelchair, a person who is blind, a student with Down syndrome. So you're not using the disability marker as an adjective. You're not saying the Downs kid, or my favorite when I go to the airport, back when I went to airports, the wheelchair man. We're going to do early seating. Where's wheelchair man? He was just here. We need to get him on the plane. Actual phrase heard at a gate. So not using the disability markers, not using outdated terminologies. I'm not going to spend time going through the do's and don'ts, but words like handicapped or handicapped is not a word that's really used by the disability community anymore. And that really is because, again, handicapped is putting the focus on the individual as opposed to the environment, which is inaccessible, or the environment which is accessible, hopefully. Language that victimizes, this is a big thing. CNN loves to do this. I always throw CNN under the bus, but there are other media outlets. Suffering from autism, afflicted with Down syndrome, wheelchair bound, confined to a wheelchair. Those are words that victimize disability. And we're not talking about disability in positive terms or in relation to the environment, which is really what we should be talking about. And avoiding language that's really precious or cute or overly creative, handy-capable, and all those things. Languages can change. It's highly personal. All of you have very specific language that you use to describe your race, your gender expression, your sexuality, your faith, all of those things. Ability and disability is the same way. So if you're ever speaking with someone and you're using terminology in person first and they say, actually, I would prefer this type of language, then obviously you would default to that and honor their choice. One way to do this is to just really use the lens of customer service. We have a guest who's asking for large print materials. We have a visitor who needs to, who needs access to our accessible entrance. I don't really need to know why. And it's not, it's not my job to ask why. It's my job to serve the customer in that moment. So when we think about why accessibility and inclusion, and I'm going to move fast through our next couple of slides here because we are a little bit behind, but I'm going to try to catch us up a little bit. So why accessibility and inclusion is important. First off, it's the law, and that is absolutely the wrong motivation. But the truth is that almost every one of you on this call are, part of an institution, which means you are covered under Title III of the Americans with Disabilities Act, which is public accommodation. But really, we do this because it's morally and ethically the right thing to do. And it is a social justice issue in every sense of the word. There is, the disability does not exist in a vacuum. It intersects with every community. There has been a lot of conversation in the past 10 months about how disability justice has to be talked about hand in hand with the other very important conversations we're having around social justice in general. There's some really staggering statistics out there about how disability justice and racial justice intersect. So this is a social justice issue. This is part of the DEI conversation. It's good economics. People with disabilities do have disposable income and do have discretionary income, possibly less right now than they did 10 months ago, 11 months ago, but still they do have that income, and you want them to spend that income with you. You want to broaden your audience base. You want to increase the stakeholders you have in your community. And as you know, most people don't engage with cultural arts organizations by themselves. They engage with their families, with their friends, with a variety of different people. So they come with friends and with family. The one I love is that it's linked to your organizational mission, vision, and goals. So all of you probably have a mission statement that is very much about, creating community, creating connection, telling stories, creating common ground, all of those things. You will find that accessibility and inclusion fits into that mission statement in some way. I was really blessed for many years to work in an organization where the phrase children of all abilities was actually part of the actual written mission statement at the time. Not everyone is that lucky. So, I rarely had to get on my soapbox at that point to talk about why this was important to our mission. But, if folks are pushing back, you can talk about how this does link into your mission. And accessibility and inclusion is simply great customer service. This is how I, in my own practice, continually frame this work, that better accessibility is really just better access for everyone. By creating a more accessible environment for everyone, you are actually creating an environment that is inclusive in many ways for many different people. Crystal, any comments in the chat that I need to be aware of? Okay, great. We have a quiet group today. Okay, so to start us out, I'm going to stop my share for a moment, mainly to calm my poor computer down, which is about to overheat. But just see what we've got going in the chat here. Okay, great. So I'm going to ask you all to think about a cultural arts experience that you have participated in. Anything that you can remember. You can reflect back to something that was in person. You can reflect back to one that happened in the digital environment. And I want you to think very briefly about how you found out about this experience. And once you decided that you wanted to engage in this experience, what did you need to do? Did you need to register online? Did you need to go somewhere and purchase a ticket? It's the day of the experience. What did you have to do to get to that experience? Did you have to log on to a special place? Did you have to travel by car? Did you have to take the metro? Did you walk there? When you got in the general vicinity of the experience, what did you encounter? What was the terrain like? What was the weather like? When you got into the waiting room of a digital event, were things clear? Did you know what to do? Were you able to know where to go and what to do and what was happening? Did you have to go through any procedures in order to get into this event or to start an event? Security, providing an email address if it was a digital event. Did you participate in anything that happened? If it was an in-person event, did you go to the restroom? Did you take in concessions? Did you visit a vendor, purchase something? Think of a moment that resonates for you in this event and think about how you made your way back home. And back home could be the other side of the room once you closed your laptop. That's okay too. So now what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to consider some different ways of engaging with the event. So possibly someone who might have a mobility impairment or use a mobility device like a walker or a wheelchair. Someone who might be blind or have low vision. Someone who may have low stamina, or someone who possibly is deaf or hard of hearing. Maybe they use a hearing aid, maybe they don't. Someone who possibly has a sensory sensitivity to light, to sound, to touch. Someone who might have a learning disability which somehow impacts how they take in visual information. Someone who might have a speech impediment or speech disfluency. Or someone who might have a cognitive or developmental disability that may impact their processing speed. I want you to go back through this event that you just had, and you can take on a couple different lenses. But when you think through those lenses that I just listed, think about the infrastructures of that experience, the infrastructures of how the event was structured, where it took place in terms of space, what the engagement expectation was, how you were intersecting with staff, how you were expected to respond, protocols that you had to go through, procedures, either in the digital landscape or the physical landscape. And my question to you is, what are you noticing as you think through this event for the second time through? Without making expectations of who would be attending this event, what are you noticing about the infrastructures? How are the concepts of visible and invisible disability coming into play? I'm going to invite you all to turn on your camera and for us to just have a quick conversation around this. Of just what did you notice this second time through? Did you notice anything? Were there shifts? Were there changes as you thought about this event through some different lenses? Would anyone like to share observations or input that they might have?
I have something to share. One thing that I've been enjoying, I attended the online Bessie Awards,
Okay.
which is like an art ceremony. And one thing they did kind of exactly like what you did. They kind of they spell out what they're wearing, like the color of their hair, race, ethnicity, different things to give people that might not be able to see a sense of what's going on in the room. And so I thought that was inclusive. And then they also, they kind of give like the original Native American terminology for wherever the artwork is happening. So if it's happening in New York, they'll use like some Native American language. And I thought that
right.
was
So they're doing a land acknowledgement, is what you're telling me, right? Yeah, for sure.
So I thought that was innovative.
Yeah, for sure. Did anyone else notice as you thought back through the second time, were there infrastructures that stood out to you in the second time through that you were like, wow, I didn't think about that, but that actually might be inaccessible or not inclusive to someone who may think, process, move, engage differently? Anyone else who would like to share?
This isn't a criticism of the venue at all, because maybe they were more obvious than I thought, but
Can I ask you first? I'm so sorry, I don't know your name. Unfortunately, you're just a number there, but hello.
Sorry.
That's okay, not your fault. Can I ask you, what was your cultural event? What was the event that you were thinking about?
I was attending, sorry, yeah, I didn't tell you that. Yeah, I was
No, I'm
attending
gonna ask you, that's okay.
a performance of a musical.
Performance of a musical.
theater
Back
in the
before
round,
times.
actually. Oh, I'm sorry. I'll stop talking. Go ahead.
No. Back in the before times, you in the round, which is great. So what did you notice that second time through when you were thinking about it? Were there infrastructures that you were like, oh?
I don't even know where. Now, again, this might be obvious if I was looking for it, but I don't even know where a person would enter if they had any sort of physical impairment. I don't know where those things. They're not obvious. They're not visually obvious, like where those accessible places are. Imagining, I've worked in retail prior to, in my life, and I just realized as you were talking, yeah, I don't know sign language. If anyone with any sort of hearing impairment came in that needed help, like at that stage that I was referring to, and in many places, is there staff there to facilitate that? I have no idea. And again, where would they find that staff? Because if that exists, it's not immediately clear to me. So a person would have to do a lot of research beforehand, I guess, to really be able to navigate that situation successfully. And then, of course, there's all the internet accessibility that we talk about, right? Like, how are they able to access the internet or to use it effectively? Like, what? Yeah. So, yeah, those are my observations.
No, I so appreciate all of that, because it's all part of the bigger picture, right? It's all part of that bigger picture. Did anyone else have something that really struck them that came up that they want to share? I don't. My guess is what came up is that you. Oh, did we have someone unmute? I think we did. Maybe. Catherine, did you want to chime in with something or no? Okay, not. Okay, so just what tends to come up is people are noticing physical inaccessibility. People are noticing, one of the things that has come up a lot. This was more in the before times when we were going to more events. People were talking a lot about security protocols that would be in place, and how those things, often security is just kind of, you're supposed to expect and understand what is expected of you, but there might not be verbal description of what's happening. There might not be an explanation. Often security is moving very quickly and doesn't really have time if you're taking longer to process. So things like that, can really come into play. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and share my screen again. Just one moment. Sorry about that. Oh my goodness. Should have made sure that someone on the commission could be singing while this is happening so that you had hold music. Okay.
Be careful what you wish for, Diane.
Yeah, I know. I actually know many of the people from the commission on here, so I'm a little worried that we might get there. Okay, so so as we think about these things, really thinking through these issues is really the first step. And what we really want to think to then is, okay, great. So how do we think about an inclusive design model? And this really goes back to this idea of an access-centered environment, this social model that we talked about, where we're creating an environment that is inclusive of everyone. We're thinking beyond the ADA. And the reason I say that is because, you know, if you're simply thinking about like, well, what do we have to do? And what's the, what is the ADA saying we have to do? That's great, but the ADA regulations aren't always practical in terms of they might not be enough, right? So for instance, I mentioned I do a lot of work with the Smithsonian Folklife Festival. And yeah, we have an incredible tech team, an incredible production team that makes sure that from a construction standpoint, all of our spaces are ADA regulatory. But then we're on the National Mall most of the time, right? In the mud and the dirt, and there's a tree, you know, growing next to this tent. And we have to think about accessibility a little differently because the standards and like sort of the minimum requirements of the ADA actually might not be enough. We might need to do something more. A museum that shall remain nameless in DC, you know, has an accessible restroom and an accessible stall in a restroom, except the turning radiuses are very hard if you have a motorized wheelchair. And at the end of the experience, you get to the door and the only way to open the door is by pulling it, but there's not enough space to back your wheelchair up so that you could actually reach the handle, right? So that's like if someone was to go in there with a tape measure, they'd be like, yep, it meets all the ADA specifications, but no one really sort of like went through it or had a person with a disability go through it and be like, okay, but yeah, just because of the way, like the shape of this restroom, it actually doesn't really work, right? So the thing about accessibility and inclusion is, you know, inclusive design is not thinking about like adding this on. Like you don't want to design your environment, design your experience, design your program, and then be like, oh no, Steven's in a wheelchair, right? That's not what you want to be doing. You want to be thinking about the fact that individuals who move differently or use, you know, assistive devices may be engaging with your space in the beginning. You know, it's not a one and done. You don't just do one special program for, you know, individuals with disabilities. That said, you know, here in the DC area, there's a lot of people that do relaxed performances or sensory friendly performances. I'm all on board for that because I think that it's an option, it's a choice. And it's also a gateway. It's also a entry point and a welcome to a community that may or may not have felt welcome in your space before, right? So the goal is for them to enter into the space and then for them to realize that they are welcome members of your community and they belong in your artistic community all the time, right? Not just on the special days, not just on the special events, but sometimes those events are required to get people in the door. This idea of accessibility rather than accommodation, and Crystal's going to drop an article that is written by an academic writer, and she talks about the idea that the phrase accommodation and the concept around providing accommodations to someone actually puts the onus on the person with a disability. They are asking for something special. We're doing this thing that's out of the ordinary. Sometimes the person with a disability, particularly if it's not a visible disability, has to kind of explain and actually out themselves, if you will, and tell them, you know, I have a friend who went through TSA at the airport. All my accessibility horror stories are about the airport today. But you know, went through the TSA situation, did not use a mobility device because they just kind of wanted to get through TSA, got through it and was like, okay, I'm spent, I'm exhausted, my stamina, my tank is empty, asked for a wheelchair and was told, you're fine, you walked through TSA, you don't need a wheelchair, these are for people who really need them. So she had to kind of prove that she actually had a disability and needed to actually have a wheelchair. So accommodation sort of is this, and in the best of all cases, there's this sort of, we'll do this for you, sir. You know, even though it's extra work and even though it's out of the ordinary, we're more than happy to do it for you, even though it's extra work, but we're happy to do it for you because we're so happy that you're here because you're special. And when you compare that to the accessibility model, which is you are special simply because you're one of our guests, and this is a customer service issue and every one of our guests is special. And so we've already anticipated that, we've already thought of the fact that you might come. We've already considered that you might be interested in attending our event through our marketing, through our messaging, and we are more than happy to welcome you to this space. In my own practice, I've been really focusing on these 4 verbs recently, so that as we design programs, as we design spaces, assuming that visitors are going to move, communicate, process, and engage in a variety of different ways. Because a lot of times when things are designed, be they buildings or experiences, people are simply thinking about the way they themselves move, or they themselves communicate, or they themselves engage. And so the experience is designed through that lens, and then it becomes an issue when someone else doesn't engage in that way. Catherine, did you have a comment you wanted to share?
Oh, no, I didn't.
Okay, sorry, you just popped up in my screen, so I thought possibly, sorry about that. Do we have any comments, Crystal, that I should be aware of in the chat?
No, ma'am.
Okay, great. So we'll keep going. So there are some organizational considerations to take into account. I can hear you all saying, I'm totally on board, Diane, what do we do? And remember, I'm not going to give you all the answers today because we couldn't possibly go through all the answers, but I am going to try to touch on sort of these kind of 6 basic points and really kind of talk about how they might apply both in a physical space and a digital space. So the first is the idea of space, environment, internal infrastructures. So that's everything from like the design of your physical space, like, you know, our guest who just shared about, she went to this performance and there may or may not have been seating and an entrance for someone who could not navigate the traditional in the round, you know, step ramped format of the space, you know, but has that been taken into consideration? Things in physical sites like restrooms, concessions, you know, are there rest areas? Are there spaces where people can get water? Just sort of the basic seating. And then going even one step further of like, what's the environment? Like, what do people have to navigate to get to us? Like, how far is the parking lot? How far is the metro stop? You know, is there one pathway that tends to be more accessible than another? Is that something we can communicate in our messaging about, you know, the easiest way or the way with the least physical obstruction to get to our space? Now, on a digital side of this, when we think of space, we think of the platform, right? Like, what is the digital platform? Is the platform itself designed to support accessibility and to support accessibility options? Is the platform, what are the steps that need to happen within the platform to make sure, you know, to plug in an interpreter, to make sure that the captioning is shown? What is the user experience? Like, you know, is the user able to control the platform in some ways? And so thinking about if your platform that you're using for your digital programming actually is one that supports accessibility. So thinking next to policies and procedures and safety protocols. So on a physical level, this is things like, you know, your traffic flow, your wait lines, your security protocols. As we think about reopening, because it will happen someday, you know, what are the safety protocols that we're going to need to have in place to ensure that we're COVID safe? Do those protocols unintentionally exclude an individual with a disability? If so, what accommodations can be made in order to support that individual? On the flip side of that, are there things that need to be put in place so that people with disabilities have the same level of safety protection as other individuals? You know, accommodations might include things like thinking about physical access adjustments, adjustments to communication, communication access, temporal access, the issue of time. This is something that's so fascinating that's recently come up. You know, if you have everybody waiting in line, or if you have timed entrances, you know, that's great. But if you have someone who can't wait in line because they have a physical disability, or they have limited stamina, or they have a cognitive developmental disability that really impacts the way in which they perceive time, are there different things you can do? Are there ways that you can allow folks to have different time? If you are doing, I know some museums are moving to timed entries now, right? And it's like you have your time ticket and you have a wristband that's pink, which means that you come in at 1:20 and you leave at 2:20. That's great, but if I have, if my disability impacts the speed at which I can move, or the speed at which I can process information, is there a way that I can have more time to experience that space so that I can have an equity of engagement? On the digital side, we're talking about like, what are your protocols to purchase tickets? Is where you're listing your event accessible? Can a screen reader, if you're blind, read that event? If there's a timeout feature in purchasing tickets, is there a way to turn that off if I'm, typing with a screen reader, or typing, if I have limited mobility on my keyboard? What are the policies and procedures that may be unintentionally barring someone? Your program content. What is your structure of your program content? What's going to happen in this program? What's the intended engagement? Are people expected to sit back and just take it in? Are they expected to offer creative input? How are you allowing for that to happen for individuals who might move, communicate, process, engage in different ways? What can you do creatively to make sure that everyone has a seat at the table? That's true in a digital landscape too. I work on a program right now, and we do a lot of showing of material culture and material artifacts and photos and slides and things like that. At the moment, there's not a really smooth way to have audio description for people who are blind or low vision when we're doing live programs. So we've trained our curators to speak and embed description as they're holding up an object. So like they're holding up an object and they're giving some visual description of that object, much like Jared pointed out, someone's visually, describing an individual, a person. They're saying, I'm holding up this, this rock, and it's beige and there's white flecks in it, and even though there's a lot of people that can already visually take in that information, you're providing it in a different way, which is also useful for people who might process information in a different way. Your communication, your messaging, your marketing, this is so important. And this is something that, Rebecca talked about in that opening video. How are you creating intentional invitation to make sure that everyone understands that they are welcome in your space? Are you using disability access icons in your marketing? Are you using, are you using those icons of like, that it's a wheelchair accessible event, or that there's going to be an interpreter, there's going to be closed captioning? Are you dropping those into your event postings? Are you dropping those into, do I have to get through the entire event and purchase a ticket before I find out if it's accessible? Or are you putting that up front with your marketing? And I think somebody actually talked about marketing too when we were processing Rebecca's video, but that idea of like, how are you creating intentional invitation? Who does someone contact if they have access questions? How, when, and where? Are your materials, and in this case, I'm going to focus on the digital landscape. There is something called the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, or WCAG for short, which is fun to say. WCAG guidelines can help you make sure that, or make your IT person and webmaster make sure that your web and your website is accessible to individuals with disabilities. And there's different checkers you can put on to check if your color contrast is going well, if you have too many motion images happening. There's a great article that was just put out by Sina Baram, who is an expert in this. Crystal's going to drop it in the chat, that wrote an article for the American Alliance for Museums. It was a blog post, and it's called like 10 steps you can do to make your website most accessible, your museum website accessible. You know what? Even if you work for a theater or a botanic garden or like a music, you can still use these tips. Okay, it's not just for museums. But this will really, this can be something that you can do. And I see Crystal's also dropping in the link to the Graphic Artists Guild, which has these disability access icons, which are free for you to download. The idea of staff connection and ownership, how are people connected to this? Is it just one person in the organization that's like, oh, those are Crystal's kids. Yeah, she worries about all those kids who have different. No, or is everybody committed to this? How does everyone in the organization involved in the mission of inclusivity, of disability access, the same way that they would be involved in your greater DEI conversations? How are you connecting to the disability community? This is really, really important. One of the reasons that I try to use so many articles and videos when I present is because it's really important to me that that individuals with lived experience are represented, that their voices are heard in this as well. I do this work and I've done it for many, many years because I'm passionate about it. But I also recognize that there are others with lived experience and their voices are a absolutely vital part of this conversation. The disability community for years has had a phrase, nothing about us without us. So finding those individuals in your community, finding the disability community, and I know, creating an access task force within your organization. And I know that's really scary. I know it's the equivalent of like, we're going to hire a housekeeper, but let's make sure we clean the house before they get here so that they don't see that the house is dirty, right? If you are reaching out authentically and truthfully to the disability community and saying, we want to do better, we are looking for your user expert advice. We're giving you an honorarium to participate in this focus group. We want to hear from you. They're going to take that journey with you. They are going to become ambassadors for you. So that's important to think of as well. And disability representation. I've done this slide many times, and that used to say disability representation within the art, meaning, you have representation in the work you're presenting, in the, you're making sure that, composers with disabilities are featured, that artwork of people with disabilities. But I'm just leaving it at disability representation because I think we all need to think about what that means across the board in terms of our staffing, in terms of our decision makers, our board. What does that look like? And it's a deeper conversation that we're obviously having in many different ways right now in our social landscape. So thinking about disability as well. I want to just briefly, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this slide, but I feel like it would be disingenuous for me to not acknowledge the giant elephant in the room, which is COVID-19. I recognize that all of you are, kudos to all of you, because I know your work is so flipping hard right now, right? We are, as arts organizations and cultural arts organizations, we are reinventing ourselves every single day. We are trying to figure out what is going on. It is impacting arts accessibility. On the plus side, the digital landscape is creating an access to cultural arts for many who've not had access before. I know we shared an article with you from the New York Times. Crystal's going to drop that link in again. That many people in the disability community are like, holy cow, I can now participate in all these things that I couldn't participate before because the digital landscape is there. In full disclosure, that assumes a level of technology access and confidence in using that technology. Although now that we're 11 months in, that confidence is actually, that article was originally written in August. And obviously we're all 6 months, ahead in our digital learning curve. The challenges that we face is that accessibility is not always a priority and a consideration. This was, I will tell you that as a member of the access and community and an advocate for the disability community, this was a huge conversation in like April, May, June. We were like, oh my God, how are we even going to keep accessibility like on the radar? Because everything else is being talked about. And this is true for digital programs. Like I said, digital platform designers, I actually had this conversation with somebody yesterday. I don't think digital platform designers are gathering in a room and saying, let's exclude all the people with disabilities. I don't think that's happening, but I think there's a lot of oversight happening in the way digital platforms are being designed right now. And accessibility is sort of like falling to the bottom. And so it takes the pressure of people saying like, you know what, we want to use your streaming service, but you're not accessible, and 25% of our audience needs your service. So what are you going to do? Where are you going to meet us, right? So thinking about this in terms of our online programming, our social media, our in-person return, all of that, I don't think we're going back to normal, personally. I also don't think I like to avoid saying the new normal, because that, you know what, the reality is normal didn't work for a whole bunch of people in the before times for a whole bunch of different reasons. So I actually think it's really, really important. I think it's super, super important that we think about, like, this is an opportunity to rebuild a new world. And what does that new world look like that is inclusive? I'm going to touch on the fact that you all have a fabulous worksheet that David sent to you. And I'm just going to talk through how that worksheet works. We are actually not going to do this activity because we are running very tight on time. But the Journey to Accessibility Inclusion worksheet that was sent along with the meeting information that's a document that you can use to actually kind of assess where your organization is. It's not meant to fit, it's a framing document, so you might have to adjust things, in that document to align with how your organization is structured. But it should give you a starting place to have conversations. It rates phase 1 to phase 4 of sort of where you are on your accessibility journey. You might find that, like, you're in phase 2 some places and phase 4 in others and phase -3 in others, and that's totally normal. It's a really great activity to have different, like, have your staff do sort of on their own and then come together and have a conversation and saying, wait, you put us at a 2, I put us at a 4. Let's have a conversation about that. Oh, wait. I find that the document actually provides some really interesting springboard for conversation, which then can allow you to determine some future goals, think about timeline and benchmarks and resources. It's really just a starting place. It's also a document you can go back to. It's a really great way to assess where you're at. And I know we have some guests here who've been through the mentorship project, and they can probably talk about, if and how they used that document in different ways when we get to their share out. So we were going to go through this activity as a group, and my apologies for the technical difficulties we had at the beginning. So, I want to make sure that we have time for our guests to share out, but I encourage you to use this document. If you have any questions about how to implement it with your staff, please reach out to me. I'll share my email at the end. So that I'm happy to talk you through that of how you can use that in your organization. So we have some guests with us today, and I'm really, really excited that they're here. And I am going to stop my PowerPoint in a second just I encourage us all to kind of like come back to that learning community and be sort of present if we can be, either verbally or visually. We have some guests here from the Hill Center at the Old Naval Hospital, both Diana Ingram, who is the executive director, and Jennifer Cartland, who is the new vice president of their board of directors, but also is the chair, or was the chair, of their Inclusion, Access, and Equity Committee. The Hill Center has done some really interesting work in how they have taken this work of disability, access, and inclusion and folded into the larger picture. The Hill Center is also very interesting because they are an organization that provides a host space for a lot of other organizations. So they're going to talk a little bit about that. They were part of the class of 2019 in the Mentor Project. And then we're going to hear from Lissa Rosenthal-Yaffe, who is the executive director of the DC Arts and Education Humanities Collaborative, class of 2020 for the CAH Mentor Project. But also just did a lot of, is a very interesting organization. It's a membership-based organization and works very differently in how they work with both arts organizations and with schools and things like that. So I'm really excited to see my friends Diana, Jennifer, and Lissa. Hi. And I am actually going to ask if folks feel comfortable turning on their cameras. I think it would be really just great for us to kind of I've turned off my PowerPoint for a little bit, just for us to kind of create sort of that learning community. And I've asked each of these folks to give sort of an 8 to 10 minute presentation of how they took the work from, how they took the work of the workshops they attended, but then how they sort of traveled on the mentorship journey. So since Hill Center's been at this a little longer, they were a class of 2019, I'm gonna ask Diana and Jennifer to start us off. And Diana, you are muted.
Can you hear me? Okay, Jennifer, I'm going to defer to you at this point, given that you're one of my many bosses. I'll let you sort of take the lead here.
That's an interesting way to categorize me, Diana. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. And thanks, Diane, for inviting us to be part of this conversation. We really appreciate it. As Diane has said, we have been engaged at the Hill Center in a bit of an ongoing conversation as a result of something that we included in our strategic plan. And I think that was our 2016 or 2017 strategic plan, wherein we had a line that spoke to diversity for all to come and participate in Hill Center programming. And when we began to dig into that a little bit, we really had to call ourselves on the carpet and ask the question, are we in fact providing a space where everyone is welcome, everyone is included, everyone feels that they have an equitable opportunity to engage in Hill Center programming? And upon asking that question, we realized that we were not really positioned to be able to make the claim that everyone had access to the Hill Center. So that caused us to look at everything, the way that we plan, the way that we offer services, the way that we communicate, the way that we develop programming, the kinds of programming that we're offering, who it is we're hoping to serve. And it just opened up a broad array of conversations that I think have been extremely beneficial at the staff level, at the board level, and certainly in a combined way. So one of our wonderful employees at the Hill Center, Charlotte Harper, I believe attended a training with another organization that had had some experience with Diane. And she is the one who then made that connection and said, we need to talk with this person because she can help us at least begin a journey and have a conversation so that we can begin to explore how we can do a better job of, in fact, being accessible to everyone in our immediate community and those who are coming from far and wide. The Hill Center, and Diana can speak to this in a little more detail, actually serves a really broad swath of the Washington, D.C. area, Maryland, and Virginia. And so people are coming from long distances to come to programming. People are taking trains, automobiles, the subway, buses, they're walking. We serve a really interesting and intricate clientele. And so that means that the needs are going to be deep and wide and broad. And so it was important for us to think about that and to recognize that we probably had work to do at the front end in terms of, again, what we're offering and then how we're providing accessibility to the groups that we're serving. Simultaneous with this conversation, we realized that the word diversity, which I'm sure all of you are very well aware, became a buzzword a few years ago, and you could ask 10 people in a room what diversity meant, and you'd get 12 different answers. And so we decided we could do the same thing. We could call ourselves the Diversity Committee, or we could think really hard about what it is we were hoping to accomplish. And what we were hoping to accomplish is equity in all that we're doing, full inclusivity for anyone who wanted to access the Hill Center, and a real approach to being diverse in both, as I said, what we're offering and who we're appealing to. That caused us to change our name from the Diversity Committee to the Inclusivity, Access, and Equity Committee. So we're now the IAE Committee, and we're really determined to get everyone to be thinking about that by utilizing that name instead of that catch-all of diversity, which doesn't really say a whole lot. Instead, we want people to know that those three things are the things that we're focusing on. So we were able to connect with Diane and bring her in. She did a training for the committee initially, and that training yielded the chart that I think was just dropped into the chat a little while ago. We brought it to the board. The board did a bit of a self-assessment and was assigned homework to look at that rubric and to kind of assess them ourselves individually. And then we brought that back to the table and had a conversation about it, which was quite revealing because our board is comprised of individuals from different age ranges, different backgrounds, different professional experiences. And so we had people that were circling 1 and 2, while other folks were circling 4s, all on the same line. And so we recognized that we had some work to do to get on the same page around where we actually are and where we need to get to. Our plan beyond that was to bring our board together for a training with Diane, and then that asterisk that Diane just mentioned happened, and that plan got sidetracked. So we haven't been able to come together as a board to do a second round with the journey rubric, but that is our intention. And another outcome of the conversations with the IAE committee has been to develop an advisory board of staff, of board members, and of participants and users to determine whether or not the public thinks that we are in a good place, or to get their input on what kinds of work we need to do to move this work forward. So that's a little bit of a background on where we were and where we are. And Di, I would hand it off to you to see if there's anything that I might have left out or excluded in that overview.
Actually,
No,
Diana, can I ask you specifically to talk about how you have folded in your commitment to disability access into the way in which you communicate and create collaborative partnerships with your outside partners? Because that I think is really interesting.
Sure. We started by going back and looking at all of our contractual relationships with our program partners and program providers, and realized that, you know, there certainly is a moral imperative to make sure that not only internally are we, you know, trying to move through this journey, but that we're also bringing our program partners with us. And, you know, it's interesting. Jennifer was talking about the arc of conversation and training. And I think that the next real goal at Hill Center is to convene a similar conversation with our users and folks that are, in addition to staff, right on the front lines of who's in the building and who's engaging with the building. And then we took to heart the sort of communications rubrics, and just on a very mundane, or not mundane, but very specific level, we, you know, re-engineered our e-blast, which goes out now to about 20,000 folks. Our videos don't launch automatically. We put in, what's the term, Diane? The signs, symbols. The recognized symbols.
Yeah, the disability access icons, or the symbols. Yeah, you guys started, I remember you started including those in your e-blasts and on your website as well.
Yeah, I mean, we were telling people on our website that, you know, we will provide ASL interpretation if it's requested, but we weren't communicating that in the front line in our e-blast. Now, of course, a lot of this is around in-person meetings, although certainly the interpretation would apply to any kind of virtual or Zoom or digital thing. We took a real hard look at our facilities. The Old Naval Hospital was renovated in 2010, 2011, and at that point it was brought up to what the ADA standards were at that point. But in conversations with Diane, we realized that, gee, by the time that renovation happened, that was probably 10 years out of date. And now our physical plant is 20 years out of date. So these conversations, both, you know, with our frontline facility team members, our board members who oversee, you know, facilities, our staff, made us realize that we have some capital expenses that we really need to look hard at. The biggest one being access to the building. Yes, we have an automatic door, but it lets someone in a wheelchair into they're trapped because the next door is not automatic. So, okay, so we absolutely, we've got to fix that. We realized that we have a lot of historic interpretive signs in the building with sort of wonderful stories of figures that are connected to Capitol Hill, the Civil War, the Old Naval Hospital, but they're not accessible. The font is too small. Anyone with who is completely blind would not be able to read them. And so again, thinking about, all right, how do we open up this incredible historic space to the broadest possible audiences? I think the real key takeaway was staff buy-in. And part of that was, you know, as a result of the mentorship training that we did, thanks to the DC Commission on Arts and Humanities, who provided the incredible Diane Nutting. I have taken your training, Diane. I think this is the 5th time I've heard part of it. And there's always something new. So I think that, and I'll stop talking because I'm going on, but, you know, when one focuses on a moral imperative with intentionality, it's remarkable the sort of basic steps that, you know, can sort of take a whole group of people, you know, into a different space. And I think that was really valuable for the Old Naval Hospital Foundation and Hill Center.
That's so great. Thank you. And I think you touched on something, Diana, I put in the chat, your relationship of like, we had the ADA regulations because we had an accessible door, but then it wasn't really accessible given the practicality of the building. We talked about that a little earlier in the session of just like, you can't just say, well, we did the regulations and we're done, which PS everybody is what your contractors will do. They'll be like, okay, we did it. We crossed off all the check boxes. And you have to push them a little bit more and poke them. But I think, Diana, you also touched on the idea that this work is a journey, and I include myself in that. I just, particularly now that I'm working from home and able to look at more, you know, articles and things, there really isn't a day that goes by that I don't look at something or read something and go, wait, let me think about that in a different way, or let me consider that in the practice. And, you know, the way we think about accessibility 5 years ago, and then the way we think about it today, based on where we are in our own journeys, based on what the landscape is. I mean, seriously, if you had told me a year ago, if you told any of us a year ago that we were all going to be in this digital landscape and we were all going to become experts at digital, you know, digital programming and digital technology. And for me, the layer is digital accessibility. I would have been like, no, that's not what I do. I can give you names of like 4 people that do that. That is what I do now. And it is a learning curve every single day. So that idea of just constantly going back and looking at what you're learning. So Diana and Jennifer are going to hang out for a minute because I do want them to be available for questions and reflections as we move to the end of the session. But I want to turn it over to Lissa, who comes to us from the DC Collaborative, the DC Arts and Humanities Education Collaborative. It's a really long title, but I love it. Give it to you, Lissa.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Nice to see some familiar faces and names. I'm Lissa Rosenthal-Yaffe, preferred pronouns are she, her, with the DC Arts and Humanities Education Collaborative, also known as the DC Collaborative, also known as the Field Trip People. But we do so much more than that. We work to provide equitable access to arts and humanities learning opportunities for students in DC public and public charter schools, as well as opportunities for our 120 plus cultural institution teaching artist practitioner members, all around the premise of access and inclusion. We were actually co-founded by the Commission on Arts and Humanities, Kennedy Center, DC Public Schools, and a few others around this idea. And yes, very proud to be attending, I guess this is probably around my 4th workshop with Diane, thanks to the Commission. And we were incredibly excited when David Markey had presented the opportunity for us to receive a mentorship with Diane, because a lot of the work that the DC Collaborative does with its membership, especially through our legacy program, Arts and Humanities for Every Student, that's the field trip or in-school learning opportunity programs that we work on with all the cultural institutions and teaching artists. We look to make those connections. We look to make sure that the programs are of high value, curricularly connected, but are also, most importantly, accessible to students. Now, have we gotten access right in our 23-year history? We've made strides, and we continue to find ways to advance how we ensure equity and access in the work that we do. And when we had wrapped up our session with Diane, she shared a really great quote from Brene Brown. And it was, "I'm not here to get it right. I'm not here to be right. Oh, I knew I was going to screw it up. Sorry. I'm not here. I should be reading it. I'm not here to be right, but I'm here to get it right. And I think that that's really important for all of us as we're going through this process, because our intention is there. Our impact, we need to make changes as we go through and go along in this journey. A couple of years ago, DC Collaborative created its first diversity, equity, and inclusion statement representative of the ideas around the entire arts and humanities education community of practice through our collective impact work. We knew that this was not a static statement. We knew that it wasn't just going to sit on a shelf. We knew that we needed to include all facets of diversity, equity, inclusion, access, what we used to call the acronym IDEA, which we shared with the Commission, Inclusive Diversity, Equity, Access. We've also expanded that to include justice now. But the accessibility and inclusion pieces in particular, those very important facets of this work were something that we needed extra support. So when we went through our mentorship with Diane, it was a two-prong approach similar to the Naval group. We had staff training sessions and an opportunity for staff to reflect together. Then we brought in some board members as well to go through our journey. And it was really a fascinating journey for us because as we each circled off what phase we thought we were in, there was some consensus in some places and others not, but there was an agreement overall that we knew we could be doing better, that we were there to get it right, and that we wanted to earnestly move forward and get it right. And one of the things that really stuck out for our group and for me in particular was around rethinking accessibility and accommodation. And this was something that we were able to change in very real time in our journey and working on this mentorship opportunity over the summer. And that is, as I mentioned, we produce these experiential learning opportunities that had to, of course, make meteoric change because field trips were not happening after March 13th this past year. So we thought a lot about accommodation and access in this piece, and we were able to make some very real changes very quickly in the memorandums of understanding and the expectation materials that we would share with schools, that we would share with our member providers. In fact, a few of our members are here, I think, today too. And that was really significant for us. And we're continuing to make those changes as we continue to have to pivot and adapt into this new space. And what really is apparent, even though many of us have gotten our sea legs in the digital space, is the tremendous inequities in the digital divide still remain for our students, not just in a socioeconomic capacity, but in an accessibility capacity. And we are doing our best, and being in a unique position, like Diane said, being a member service organization, that we can share out the learning that we received thanks to the Commission and Diane to our entire community of practice. So we have, through our Any Given Child DC Collective Impact Initiative, we have a equity and justice committee that is reactivating this winter and spring, and we will be able to hone in more on the learnings that we received from Diane, and hopefully also have an opportunity for Diane to come back to our larger community of practice to think specifically about K through 12 education and the students. And back to that point that I said really resonated for us was the difference between accommodation and accessibility. And this is where I want to just share something just to get kind of real, and not to say it in a punitive way or to name out any particular entities or individuals. But when we coordinate a field trip learning opportunity, whether it's virtual or in person, usually this would happen in person, we don't know the classroom. We don't know the students in those classrooms. And this is something that's very important. And we know that so many amazing, awesome teachers are fully committed to every single student. But we have heard over the years, anecdotally, of students that don't make it onto the bus to go to the Kennedy Center, that don't make it onto the bus to go on a field trip with us, or don't have the right tools and access to get on. And we need to help shift the culture in learning so that there are these opportunities and that they're available for all. Some of our members are light years ahead of us in that work. Imagination Stage, of course, no surprise, and a few others in really welcoming and making those accommodations so that educators and students don't have to ask for it, that it's there and ready. And we can only do our best to then hope that that trickles down and translates to all of the educators knowing that there are opportunities for all of their students in our cultural institutions, whether it's virtual or hopefully someday in the future in person. So I just wanted to share that piece because that was the biggest learning for us, understanding the difference between accessibility and accommodation.
In person, it's going to happen.
Yes.
Lissa, thank you so much. And thank you to Diana and Jennifer as well. You know, I just think it's, Lissa and her staff are also on a mission around accessible busing. Hang out later if you want to hear that whole story. Because that's a really interesting journey with the DC public schools and what buses will be provided or not for a situation, and public busing companies. You know, so I want to make sure we have an opportunity for questions. And since we're so close to the end here, I'm going to really briefly go through the rest of our slides, and then we'll open it up to questions and reflections. Just so folks know, I've already told David, I know our session officially ends at 2:30 and we'll lose our captioner at 2:30, but I'm going to hang out in the room like I would if we were doing a real workshop. So if you want to continue chatting, and want to just have a more fluid, open discussion or ask any questions, please feel free to hang out. We'll be hanging out for a few minutes afterwards. But I did want to share sort of another slide here that is okay. It's getting easier, guys. This idea, and I've shared this. This looks probably familiar to Lissa and Diana and Jennifer both. Is this idea of this design model for success when you're talking about accessibility? That there's an opportunity, which some people will call a challenge and some other people might call a problem, right? And so then you have these community conversations, and that community is both your internal community, your stakeholders, and your external community. Remember, it's so important to get that external community involvement. You develop, you design, you implement, and then look at that loop at the bottom. You're constantly, as Diana said, you're constantly reassessing, going back, implementing again, reassessing, going back, implementing again. And that becomes your business as usual model. And that's really what all three of our guests here have been talking about today, is how they have really thought about how do they take this work and incorporate it more into that business as usual model, as opposed to this separate thing that we do over here to make sure that we're checking off checkboxes, which these organizations are not doing. And I'm sure that none of you here, that is your goal either. There are a lot of community resources and at your fingertips, and we are going to be sending out after this session today. We're going to send out the slide deck to you. We're also going to send out a listing of all the links that we put in the chat, which will include links to some resources such as the Kennedy Center Office of VSA and Accessibility, which runs the Leadership Exchange in Arts and Disability. It's usually a conference that happens every summer, but it is, you know, we're sort of moving into a digital model. There's some options happening, and you'll receive the link to that in our post. In addition, there's a lot of local access knowledge networks around the country, but they're awesome because they offer professional development. And now that we're in a digital landscape, you can go to professional development anywhere. You can go to professional development in New York or Chicago or Philadelphia. I have actually attended accessibility and inclusion professional development from all of these organizations in the past 6 months, and they're all doing tremendous, amazing work. And, you know, you all are also, you know, you are your own resources as well. Join forces, collaborate together. Say, you know, how can you go after some grant monies together for maybe shared equipment? How can you go after, how can you start having a consortium? The DC Arts Access Network has had, we've been in a little bumpy of a hiatus, but it is a collection of people committed to accessibility from the arts and cultural arts and access community across DC. And so really connecting, they do have a Facebook page. So connecting into there and connecting to their website and their email. Again, some of the things we've been talking about before we open it up to questions and reflections and comments, framing inclusion as an institutional value, that this is part of your DEI conversation, which you've heard from both Lissa, from both the collaborative and let's say you are the collaborative. No, from the collaborative and the Hill Center today. Starting where you are. Where you are on this journey right now is absolutely fine, because that's where you are. And you're going to look ahead and you're going to set yourself some short, medium, and long-term goals and some action steps to get there. And, sometimes people come out of these conversations, myself included, and you're like, oh my God, everything's broken. We're not going to fix everything overnight. That is a true statement. You are not going to fix everything overnight. So, taking those steps and moving slowly and carefully. Connecting with the disability community and listening, and then as you're rebuilding this new, as we're returning to whatever it is we're returning to, this new world we're creating, thinking about yes and, thinking about the idea that there are some cool things that have developed in the past 10, 11 months, not a bunch of them, but some that are pretty cool, right? And how do we take those things and how do we include digital programming? This is something we're thinking about, I know, at the Folklife Festival, of just how do we use that now to connect to people who can't get on the National Mall when it's 103 degrees out, who are in the UAE or in Brazil and just can't get over here, but we still want to feature their work. How can we use digital programming in that way? So thinking of it as a yes and, not an either or model. Celebrating success, even if it's small and it is a journey. So we're going to open it up. I'm going to stop the screen share in a moment, and I will drop my email into the chat as well. But just thinking about, I would love to open this up for us to just kind of have an open conversation as a learning community for the next few minutes here. And as I said, I will stick around till 2:45. But just what's resonating for you, thinking about what are you excited about? Is there something you can apply to your work right away? I heard someone early on in the conversation be like, oh, well, we could do that tomorrow. Yeah, great. Where are there sticky spots? Because there are sticky spots for everybody. And what are plans to kind of, where can you find allies? And then what's next? So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing. Let's open up our learning community again, and questions for me, comments for me, reflections for all of us, or questions for our three guests. And I know we're coming up on time, so I'll ask David to keep an eye to that and chime in when we need to officially end. But I will definitely be staying around till 2:45 if folks would like to talk.
Oh.
I see that Dana has a question. Is it Dana? No, I'm sorry.
Oh yeah, it's Dana.
Hi.
Yes. Hi. Thank you for your workshop. It was very interesting and engaging. I had a question, which I run the main dance company, modern dance company here in the city, and we're based at the National Portrait Gallery. So we have a whole office of accessibility that helps us with lots of different ways. And one thing that we do, if there's a lecture or even if there are words within a song that we want people to understand better and access, then we have sign language experts that will help us with that. But one question I have has to do with language accessibility for immigrant populations, because we also have some people come to our performances that are native speakers or foreign speakers in how do you say, like Vietnamese, Korean,
sure.
Mandarin. And so what do you suggest in terms of how to approach that? And also what is appropriate if someone has a hearing need, which is not American Sign Language based?
Sure, great. So first off, you're working with Vanessa Jones in the National Portrait Gallery, and she's a rock star, so yay for that. I would say, so this is actually interesting, and I'm going to share a personal experience. I do work not with the Smithsonian Folklife Festival, although you would not think that based on today's presentation, because that's where all my examples have come from. But At the Smithsonian Folklife Festival, we pivoted to this digital model, and we had a series of digital programs called Encuentro en el Smithsonian, which were all in Spanish. We did not, and we provided English subtitles after the fact. So we were like, we're going to do 3 Spanish-speaking programs specifically for the Spanish-speaking community. So it was really interesting. I actually found a Spanish to American Sign Language interpreter because I recognized that there were people that might their base language from whatever country they had come from might have been Spanish, but probably here in the US as a deaf person, they were probably using American Sign Language. So we had someone going from Spanish to ASL. And then we did Spanish closed captions. And someone was like, why are we going to do Spanish closed captions if later on we're going to subtitle this into English? I'm like, because if I'm a Spanish speaker and I'm hard of hearing, I want to capture what's happening. So we actually had a Spanish language captioner who was captioning. I think what's interesting is there's a couple different things you could do. I think you could provide materials, advanced materials or pre-materials that have maybe if there's a poem you're using with your dance piece, maybe it's written in 3 different languages, which I actually think is just great educationally diversity for everybody to see that, right? I think if there is, if there's someone who's, I actually will say this, you should, I think particularly in the digital platform world that we are in now, always have captioning. Just plan for it. Plan to have captioning. Either closed captioning or, I would say if you can get a real-time captioner, we have a real-time captioner today, Teddy, who's been working really hard. It is better than the automatic speech recognition captioning. I will say some digital platforms, their automatic speech computer generated captioning is better than others. Talk to me offline about that. I'm willing to share some thoughts. And so, so thinking about it that way, I think I'm hopefully getting to some of your answer, Dana, of just how do you deal with a variance of American Sign Language? The other thing is American Sign Language is, a lot of people, there's something called CDIs now, which are certified deaf interpreters, which are actually, there'll be a team of interpreters, right? So what should be happening in the White House press briefings, and is sometimes happening, but should be happening more often, is that a hearing interpreter is taking the deep, rich, dense, information that Jen Psaki is saying, translating it to American Sign Language. And then there's a deaf interpreter who's looking at that American Sign Language and going, okay, how am I going to break this down so the wide range of individuals from the deaf community can access this information, so that I'm not finger spelling word after word after word that's really difficult, and you're going to be International Trade Organization, what's that? This is specifically, you see this a lot in emergency management, FEMA does this. So that there's ways, so even American Sign Language, it's for people who live in America who are part of the deaf community, but there's a wide range of diversity, just like there's a wide range of literacy in spoken English, same thing. So I think you can use captions, you could provide information in advance, but there are captioners and ASL interpreters who will go from Mandarin to American Sign Language. They might even be someone who can go from, so I swear I work with more people in the Folklife Festival. We also, this past summer, we had a Portuguese, he's kind of a rock star in Brazil, apparently, but he was singing in Portuguese, and we had someone who was actually going back and forth between the spoken Portuguese, American Sign Language, and Portuguese Sign Language and Brazilian Sign Language. They were able to trilingual all of it. And so they were able to provide a wide range of access in that way.
Oh, great. That's really helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, of course, please. Yeah. Questions for me or reflections or questions for Lissa or Diana or Jennifer? I cannot thank all 3 of you enough for sharing and your candor and your time and all of.
And one of our attendees, Diane, had written a little bit of a reflection in the chat.
Yeah.
If you want to take a look from Ashley. About community.
So Ashley has written, I'm excited for the journey and all the folks will be able to co-create with by increasing the accessibility of our spaces and programming. I'm thinking about how we immediately apply community conversations in a meaningful way and asking what accommodations do you use rather than trying to clean the house before the housekeepers by assuming what accommodations people need. Yeah, Ashley, that's a really great perspective and way to approach it. I definitely think, you know, if you have a community of stakeholders within your audience who is also, I worked with a theater company once and I got there and we're like, we're so excited. You're going to bring in the deaf community and you're going to have ASL interpreted performances. And I was like, well, is the deaf community coming to your theater? And they're like, no, they hate theater in this town because like the big performing arts center really screwed them over a while ago. And I was like, okay. I was like, I'm noticing there's these 7 blind ladies and they're like, oh, they come to everything. And I was like, are we doing anything for them? Because we should probably start there. So I think starting with who is in your community is definitely a good start. You know, there's several different resources that Crystal can drop in the chat at the end, and also I can sort of share in our reflective from the the ADA Center and the National Endowment for the Arts about how you can make some decisions around blanket accessibility. But yes, you should get people with disabilities into your facility when it is safe to do so and have them do a physical audit of the space. Ford's Theater, if any of you have connections with Ford's Theater, did an incredible job with this about 3 years ago. Allison Alonzi was their director of patron services. She's now up at Strathmore, but she brought in user experts from around the country. These were accessibility folks, but were also people with disabilities, and they did a physical and programmatic audit over 3 days. She's like, it was actually painful at times because she was so embarrassed. These were people that she knew and respected and colleagues, and they were having trouble intersecting with her building and with her programming. And she was like, I'm mortified. But at the same time, they learned so much from it, right? And it really impacted, this was like 3 or 4 years ago, and it totally shifted how they were thinking about accessibility. So if you guys know people at Ford's, connect with them and see how they did that community conversation. You know, I'm thinking about Ashley's question too, like reaching out to organizations, you know, DC Autism Parents, DCAP, you know, the Columbia Lighthouse for the Blind. There's a lot of, there's a deaf, I forget the name of it. I'm going to butcher the name, so I'm not going to say it. But there's a lot of different service organizations and community groups out there that have, you know, that can offer guidance.
Diane, this is David. If I could just jump in.
Absolutely.
I think part of it, and you know, several of our guests sort of mentioned it, is if you are overt in welcoming people to engage in a conversation with you, you know, it's something that we at the Commission are talking about. We're about to launch a new website, and I'm saying I would love to have a welcome in the 4 major languages of the city other than English on the website, so people know, hey, you know, they've left a message in Spanish or in, you know, Chinese or Amharic, and they're welcoming me in. So sort of speaks to the video earlier of the sort of the call in culture rather than the call out culture. How do you invite people in and then start a conversation with them as to, you know, how, you know, you can best serve them?
That's so true. Yeah, and that idea of intentional invitation, because people are always, I have never talked to an arts organization that's like, well, yeah, we intentionally didn't want people here. Like I say, you know, and they're like, well, of course, anybody's welcome in our doors. I'm like, but do they know that? Because the reality is a lot of people, a lot of individuals with disabilities, and this was outlined in some of the articles that we sent you prior to the session today, they're just used to not being accommodated. I had a conversation with a parent many years ago, and she's like, we just assume that nobody knows what it's like to be us. And nobody's going to care what it's like to be us, and nobody's going to help us. Nobody's going to offer any support for what we need to do. So we kind of don't bother anymore. Or we come in like gangbusters because we're just ready to fight because we've had to fight so hard. And that's just the reality. So, you know, it is about intentional invitation. It is about making sure that, and that can be so small. It can be in your messaging. It can be in the way you talk about things. It can be, you know, what Rebecca points out in that video of just having individuals with disabilities in pictures of people with disabilities in your space. just making the intentional experience to, just like you are making sure that you're being reflective of diversity in all the other ways.
And Diane, I know, there's oftentimes a price tag associated with, a lot
Sure.
of, these pieces. So I encourage folks as they have conversations within their organizations and with external stakeholders, to come back to us too. You were talking about website, content accessibility and so on. Something that we did a couple of years ago with our facilities and buildings grant, which traditionally has been for brick and mortar, is that we allowed folks to apply to that grant for the, to secure a new website. So there's sort of, there are ways that we can, as the commission, can possibly help. Who knows? I mean, we consider interpreters as infrastructural, pillars to your programming, and so that
you heard it here first, folks.
Yes.
David Markey says it.
So the worst thing that we can say is no. But if you never ask, we won't know.
And I also do think there's a lot of I do want to touch on that funding thing, because it is a real thing, and I'm not going to try to say but I will also say that a lot of the things you can do to create an accessible and inclusive environment are not they are not cost prohibitive. So thinking if money is really the issue, think about what you can do first. I know Lissa and Diana have both heard me say this, put an accessibility line item in every single grant you write, every single one. Because first off, you're creating a little kitty, you're creating a little pot so that when somebody comes and is like, but I want to come see your Celtic art presentation, and I need an interpreter, and you're like, oh no, we're out of money. You can be like, no, we have this pot of money because we've been getting grant money all the time. But also, you're making a statement that this is important to you as an organization. You're also making a statement that when it does come time to apply for a grant that is specifically accessibility focused, you can say this has been a priority for us. We're already thinking about this as a priority, right? I will also say combining forces, finding out if there's ways to rent, for a while, when we get back to in-person programming, for a while, I believe it was the Kennedy Center was doing an equipment rental program. So if you were doing, in a temporary space and you were doing something that required assistive listening devices, they were renting those out, or there were captioning boards. There was something they were doing in that vein. There are grants out there for accessibility. The Christopher Reeve Foundation has some different grants. Some of them are permanent. Some of them are designed for temporary short-term things. So there is money to be had out there. I will say that right now it is, again, after the events of this summer and the murder of George Floyd, I know there was a lot of accessibility people saying so my funders are telling me if I'm not doing anything that's working on racial justice, they won't give us money anymore. But I need money for disability justice. And then that's where you have that conversation. I encourage you to go to that Ford website. Crystal, could you actually drop that in the chat again? The there is no justice without disability, because that will help you with some of the intersectionality to have those conversations and say, we are serving both these communities. It's not an either or. It's a yes and.
Diane, we're almost at 2:45. Thank you again. This is probably the 6th or 8th time. I'm like Diana. I'm like, every time I attend these, I always get so excited and about the possibilities. And as you said earlier, it is the right thing to do. It's not what should we do or what's the least we can get away with doing. It really is the right thing to do. Because we never know when we're going to enjoy or join that that club. As you said, they're always accepting new members.
Yeah, the good news is if we all live long enough, we're all going to join that club. It is an organic, natural part of life. Disability is a part of life. We are all going to be connected to it in some way. And not to be a downer, but it is particularly true right now. Like, you know, given the prevalence of COVID, given how that is impacting people, given the long-term impacts that we're already seeing from folks who have recovered, this is now part of our lives. And actually, I was speaking to someone yesterday who said it's going to completely shift this experience of both COVID and what we've all had to endure in the last 12 months of the dual pandemics of our world is going to significantly shift how we start talking about mental health in this country. Significantly shift it.
Thank you again, Diane. Diane referenced the mentoring piece of what it is she's done. And so we're hoping to offer that to a handful of organizations again this year. I will include information when we send out the materials to everybody, all the participants. You know, I'll let you know how the best way is to sort of go about participating in that. It's a great opportunity, and we all know that everybody's really, really busy, but Diane is pretty flexible in how she crafts it and with schedules and so on. So again, on behalf of the staff who are in the room and everybody at the commission, thank you so much for participating. Yes, Diane.
I want to thank our captioner Teddy, if she's still with us. I just want to thank her for her work today. I want to thank Lissa and Diana and Jennifer, who I think Jennifer had to hop off, but you know, for their work with us today. And like I said, I will still hang on for a couple more minutes if anyone has a pressing question, but I dropped my email in the chat, and I'm also on LinkedIn if you want to reach out to me that way. So thanks you for the opportunity.
Thanks again, Diane. Thanks everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you all.